Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to another exciting Data Forge episode. And we're going to get Big Z on the line right now. Calling Big Z. Hey, Big Z. Zarathustra, how are you?
I am well. How are you?
Good. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm really honored to have you on the show. As you probably all know, Big Z, of course, is one of the hosts of Archon's Corner. And also, I believe, is the leading Amber Shard um, on the top of the charts for Amber Shards. Is that still true?
Yeah, it is been that way for I don't know 3 years, 2 years. I don't know how long it's been there, but I will be the longest Master Vault leaderboard holder of all time. Thank you, COVID.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely. So I'm
so
gonna throw in a link to Archon's Corner podcast in the chat and also their Discord. Make sure to check them out. They got a lot of fun, exciting stuff going on there. If you're a Patreon, you can listen to their podcasts as they're recorded live, and they have a lot of other cool benefits as well.
oh, thank you.
So, Big Z, again, thank you so much for joining us. Why don't you give us a background of kind of how you got started with Keyforge?
Sure. So I was a big board game player. My family and multiple friends, we play lots of board games, from Catan to Dominion to Battlestar Galactica, Resistance, Shadows over Camelot, tons of board games, all kinds. And at one point on Amazon, multiple times I saw pop up um, there's a unique game coming out that like the November time when Keyboard was being launched. I was like, "What does this mean?" I kept seeing this little unique game design symbol from FFG. I was like, "No game's unique. Like everything's just repackaged, and we buy things for the theme." So I like watched a little video. I think Garfield was actually in the video, and they started talking about the algorithm and how every single deck was different, couldn't be modified. Every single back was different. So I bought like after that video, I think that day I bought a starter set for my family and 4 other families for, like, Christmas,
Nice.
and then we had our Friendsmas, since we always get together, one of the Fridays around Christmas time, and, like, 5 families just sat around and played Keyforge the whole day. It
That's
was
so cool.
fantastic. That's my story, like, after that, like, at that point moment, there's probably, like, 12 of us in that group. And some of us, about 8 of us, kept playing for the next month or so, and then from there, probably 6 of us just kept playing, um, to varying levels of degree the whole time, but, like, out of those, uh, my son, my wife, uh, someone, like, so close to me at the time that I called, like, my sister, like, we went to multiple vaults, we were all in the top 100, and we just kept going to events, playing Keyforge. I think it is the most fun IP and game to experience in person. It's fun online too, but it's really just not the same. Uh,
Yeah.
so it's just a great game. So
Well, that's so awesome. Thanks for sharing that with us. And we just got raided by Dinobot. Thanks, Dinobot. Welcome, everybody. Really excited to have Big Z on the show with us. And today we are going to be talking about SAS. That's right. It is Master of the Theory, Fun with SAS. And having Z on the show, I think, is going to be a great wealth of knowledge, and also he
yeah,
actually suggested it after the first Data Forge episode. So it kind of
yeah.
yeah.
I'd call your episode, and I was just randomly doing some like simultaneously that day. I had nothing to do with your event, but I had run searches that day because people were talking about like different SASs, and I was running the Fire Cell Frenzy event where I had taken like 50 decks that had 90 above stats were all scanned during the fire sale time. And like it just struck me that like there's no Brobnar in the whole event. Half the event was 25 Worlds Collide Brobnar decks. I was like, well, World's Collide Brobnar is epically bad. We all know this, but like, is it statistically bad according to SAS? And I like went into search. Like, there are no zero Worlds Collide SAS 90 plus decks that have Brobnar in it. Um,
Yeah, what a nut
and that
stat.
like that was just crazy. I was like, no, no, like really, like. So I just started searching some other stuff, and I was like, there's some very interesting connotations that can be like pulled from that. Again, it's all like it's not just one person's theory as far as like these values of the cards. Like SAS is derived by a lot of people's input, um, as far as like the way Nova designs the whole scheme of things.
Right.
So it's interesting to see like what the community is rating the cards and whatnot. Some of the SAS is great, some of it is not as great. So
Definitely, and it's going to be fun to kind of explore that in this episode. And so, kind of what we're going to go through is kind of what our background is with SAS first to start out with, and kind of where, what how we use SAS, kind of what it means to us. What is SAS? And then it's going to be really fun to really dive into the landscape of the 90 plus SAS decks. Um, Z's
sure.
already told us no Worlds Collide Brobnar decks is crazy. But
Yeah, I
what
know
are
that was
some of the other crazy stats?
um as far as just the 90 SAS decks.
Yeah, so we'll dive into that. Yep.
Um
And
oh, go ahead.
yeah, I was just gonna kind of give a quick overview of what we're gonna be going over. Then we'll be going through kind of SAS through the sets, take a look at
Mhm.
some of the highest AERC and lowest AERC cards through the sets and give our take now. Like, has it changed? Are they still accurate? Um, and then we'll see kind of if we get to the Dark Tidings AERC versus win rates. There is some interesting data. Now, the data is a little bit flawed, but we do have questions for Z also to finish up, and we'll definitely get to that.
Always good to answer some questions. I might not have the right answer, but I'll give an answer.
Okay, so yeah, going back to SAS, kind of, how do you use SAS? Like, what are your thoughts on SAS?
On a very personal level, as far as how I use it to day, I'm not necessarily pulling up 2 decks and say, "Oh, this deck has 90 and this deck has 81. The 90 is gonna win." Like, that is not where I go with SAS. SAS generally gives me a, like, by set valuation, honestly, 'cause, like, I was there from the beginning. I know how SAS evolved. I know to the best of our abilities and the community's abilities, like, the SAS for Coda and AOA, to an extent, are fairly on point for as far as like, does it accomplish the objective of the game? So I know if I see a deck that's really 85 or higher in Coda, as far as the core principles of how most competitive players play the game, if it's in that range, it is at least accomplishing all of the objectives that you need to accomplish inside of a game. It does start to get a little rough beyond that, and we kind of know the reasons why. It's just as the game got more evolved and complex, it got harder to tie certain like arc ratings, which we don't say AERC, we always call it arc. Uh, Two cards, which in turn made the SAS harder to generalize as far as like overall deck power. But outside of like in Coda, I think SAS is probably where it shines the best. Like that's the set it was designed around. That is where it is the most accurate. I think it is also very, very accurate as far as AOA goes, but it doesn't clearly identify like which decks are the best combo decks in the world.
Yeah.
It does a pretty good job now, and we put a lot of work into it getting there with like the Jinka decks, the Drummernaut stuff, Brig to an extent. So it has gotten a lot better than what it was. But once you get to Worlds Collide, like that's where some things like kind of go rough, and we saw that in the event I ran recently. Like like I think 70% of the field had dinos in it, so like 35 out of the 50 decks. That would suggest
Wow.
that like dinos is the most dominant house out of MM and Worlds Collide, but we have data from events and events and events. Like we know that's not true.
Yeah.
Like we know that Dis and Logos And then coming up third is probably Star Alliance. I'd have to look into that a little bit more, but most likely Star Alliance are the three powerhouse set like houses for those and Worlds Collide as far as yielding wins. So that's like an area where SAS is not seeing. It's still sassing out the dinos is really high, but it's not quite getting the victories that you would expect.
Right, and I guess the way that I see Saurians it's almost like a good Brobnar plus combos. And like you said already, it's really SAS struggles a little bit in really being able to um, give a good number for combos. And it makes sense because it's combos, even those ones that you mentioned in AOA, a lot has been done to really boost up
Yeah,
Genka and Gangernaut, but it really is dependent on the deck whether they're going to come out, right? And if you actually hit that combo or not,
yeah.
and dependent on the draw. And that's also true for Worlds Collide, Mass Mutations, and DT. And so you
Mhm.
can't rely only on some statistic because a lot of it has to do with, oh, is a person really trying to make that combo happen and they're going to do whatever it takes and hold on to a card the whole game to make
Yeah.
that combo happen? Or do they have the tools, the efficiency to make that combo happen? Um, because, yeah, some of those combos are a zero in the actual
Yep.
implementation if they don't get it off, or they're a 10 in arc if they do get it off. So,
Sure.
yeah, Worlds
And
Collide,
that and
especially with
that's
Saurian,
yeah.
has like so many great combos with Imperial Forge and Brachus and all the craziness you can do with Six Semper and stuff. And yeah,
If you can
sorry,
actually do all those things.
right,
And that's what I was like in AOA, we put a lot of effort and work into like can Jinka actually fire? Not just does it exist. Does Drummer have like board wipes to pair with landing the combo along with archiving because you can't always board wipe and then combo. Like we put a lot of effort into that, and a lot of effort was put in there to try to tweak that in Worlds Collide. It's just between the way Exalt Amber works, needing certain archives, the combos often involving more than two cards, because like Jinka's just two
yeah,
cards, Dremernaut's just two cards. Like we knew what to do with that, but like you're talking about more often not more than two cards
definitely,
for a lot of the high end combos in Worlds Collide, because like you need Tribute, Strix, or Brackets, and then the Imperial Forge. Like there's a lot of stuff you
exactly,
need to happen. And it's really hard based on the core of how SAS was designed to see that. It wasn't
yeah.
designed for for more than two card synergy, or like combo synergies like that.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And
W-
like you were saying, the way that I really use SAS is try and understand kind of some of the good points out of a deck. Is it good at creature control? Is it good at amber control? Is it good at ember generation? But not really try and use it to say, here's what this deck can do, because you also need to look into what does that really mean for the deck's game plan? And when that deck is up against something that's got tons of creature control versus low creature control, how's it going to perform? And so,
100%. That is actually what I do as well, way more often than just look at SAS. I look at the actual arc numbers. I look at the amber control, the expected amber. Does it even have artifact control? Does it have creature control? What is, if it has speed, what is that speed? And then I kind of go from there. Occasionally, I'll look at the disruption stat to see if it can mess with my opponent's game plan at all, because there are certainly just decks in this game that will just win by a certain turn. Like we mentioned Jinka, there's also Battlefleet Key Abduction. Like if you don't have any way to interfere with some of these decks' game plans, they are just going like you're on a timer. They're playing solitaire. You're not. So
yeah.
like it is good to have some disruption in the deck. That's not like the only thing I look for, but I do look to see if it has at least that option. Um, because I'm still the firm believer there will never be an S tier deck in Keyforge just because there are so many iterations of how the game is played. There's
Totally. That's
never
what's so cool
yeah,
about it.
yeah, and that's one of the reasons why I love the game. Like
Yeah.
there's never going to be a deck that's going to sit down to any event and say, "Look, I have a 90% chance just to make top cut because I'm playing this deck." Because to have that percent chance means you have to have like a 95% chance to win every game. And like that's just never going to be a thing for us. And I like that challenge.
Yeah, definitely. I totally agree. And and like you were saying, like SAS was really good with Coda and AOA. And like after those two sets, it was like dialed in so good. And then after that, what's interesting to me is I feel like after that, as we get to the combos and different board states from Worlds Collide, Mass Mutations, DT, like even how it interacts with Coda to me is different because we're now valuing different things. Um, Even like you said, like this disruption can really disrupt some of these combos that we're talking about, and so that's so more important. And yeah, it continues to
Yeah,
get more and more interesting as every set comes out, different metas, different kind of combos, and kind
sure.
of ways to win.
Yeah, like SAS in general, like it's really good for Coda. It's pretty good for AoA, especially if it's not Jinka. Like it should be very, very close. Sort of falls apart with Worlds Collide if there is story in there. I actually do think it rebounded pretty well with MM. MM, not so much as the SAS as far as the MM decks, but the arc scores for the MM are, in my opinion, very, very good as far as like getting value as far as what the decks do. Because the pip placement doesn't matter for like you still know the deck does X thing, no matter where the pips happen to be. I guess occasionally you'll get a super sad like I don't know capture gateway,
Yeah,
but overall the arc is not being affected that much by where the pips are because it's still just going to happen in your cycle. And it completely falls apart in Dark Tidings. My ongoing joke is the SAS score for Dark Tidings is just a base 40, and then you roll 3d20, add them together, and that's your SAS for Dark Tidings because everything that is good in any good Dark Tidings deck is almost entirely dependent on more than two cards and how they function directly together. And that's compounded by the fact that whether you have tied users versus racers in your deck, like doubling down on that idea. So it's like 2 to 3 cards plus tied use. And SAS in no way was designed to see that.
totally. And it's it takes me back to the burger tokens ranking. I forget what they called their ranking, but burger tokens had a ranking for decks that was just like a random number.
Yeah, yeah.
Here,
Like I mean that
sorry, yeah, I got a question for you though. We're gonna get into 90 SAS decks pretty soon, but my question for just SAS ratings in general is when it gets like to high SAS numbers, like over 90, one thing that I've noticed is it's really hard to tell, especially by the SAS number, is this deck just something that's totally broken? And kind of one thing that like it's hard for me to assess sometimes is like, oh, 195 SAS deck can be totally broken. I like practice against it and it's just like this wins, easily all the time versus another 95 SAS deck which obviously has a bunch of good cards because of SAS, but it's like not broken and it's defeatable.
I think one of the easy I don't know if this is like spilling some kind of secret or not, but like when I'm comparing 2 decks like that, when I see like one's a 95 and another one's a 95, from my personal experience, again, like you would have to run tons and tons of data to get real like a lot better data.
Yeah.
Um, but between the 2, more often than not for me, the one that has like like a significantly higher arc often crushes the other one and open field play much more. So like let's say I have a 95 stat stack and my arc is like 77. And then I have another 95 SAS deck. If that arc is 70 or lower, I for sure would expect the 75 plus arc to trash the other one in
No,
most cases.
that makes sense. Yeah.
Um, that's just my experience, and that's one of the things that I do look for when I'm like specifically shopping or whatever. Because there's tons of decks. There's tons of decks for sale all the time. Like we don't have infinite time. Time is
Yeah.
often one of the more valuable resources, especially when you are like when you do have at least a certain budget. So you have to figure out how you're going to choose the time. And I look at the arc when I'm comparing like very very close things. Um, but as far as like in like depending on the set, if you are in that like 93 plus SAS range, all except for Dark's Tidings, I would say in most cases that range of SAS is going to do very well in open competitive, especially if it's in set, like the
Right.
same set decks that are like 80 or below. It's gonna be very hard just because if you're playing your 36 cards, they're playing their 36 cards. DOK is telling you their cards are just doing more on average, and that's literally how we design the arc for every card, and that generally is true. 'Cause again, this isn't just Nova making up random numbers just her whim, unless it's Sanctum. She literally hates Sanctum. So,
We'll get into
um,
some of that too later, some of the houses and
um,
how they
yeah,
stack up.
so In
Well,
in general, I would expect those 93 pluses to trounce the 80 pluses
right.
for the SAS comparison inside the set, unless it's start tidy.
Okay, and you're talking about SAS and Arc. That is a great segue into what the heck really is SAS and Arc. We've been talking about it.
Yeah.
So, Arc, of course, is kind of really calculating what it are each of these cards going to do in terms of expected
Mm.
Ember, artifact control, creature control, efficiency, Ember control, recursion, disruption, all of those things. Um, Whereas SAS stands for synergy, anti-synergy.
Yep.
That is where um, there is some estimation to try and tell with other cards in the deck what type of synergies are there or anti-synergies that then kind of boost the stats of the deck based off of those cards being together.
Yes. And that's where it gets fairly impossible for like a random person to calculate like on their own what those synergies are. But basically, it is to the effect is every card has some kind of trait, whether it's to draw or destroy, etc. And then there are cards that are better if these traits exist in deck. So it increases the arc for that ability to some degree, or hurts that arc to some degree. I guess the simplest like idea of this isn't going to be the exact names of the traits, but like way back in the day, you have like anger. All it does is it makes a dude fight. So it's going to have a trait cause fight, and then you'll have a bunch of creatures in deck that would be good at fighting, like Dodger or Mesa Asp or Moon Cursor, or it could be even be in house like a Fire Spitter or Trump. All those were original old school Coda. So the more angers you have in deck, plus the more creatures that like to fight in deck, the higher that synergy score goes. So when you see that arc range on a card, it gets pumped up or reduced depending on whether like the creatures will ever get to fight. Like if you have a bunch of fight creatures and literally no way in your whole deck to make them fight other than call house make fight, that arc is going to be really, really low for those creatures.
Right. Now that makes sense. And of course, the example on the SAS page is if you have Ember Imp, which of course is very disruptive,
Mhm.
only lets you play 2 cards. It synergizes very well with creature protection. So Shadow Self has a large creature protection score, and it can
Yep.
protect that Ember Imp. That's good synergy.
Oh, I loved me some Shadow stuff back in the day. I
Oh
was
yeah,
super that one was set one only. They bounced that real fast. And we
definitely.
never really got anything like that, like, not even close.
Right. Yep. Shoulder It is a
Yeah.
weak comparison.
Yes. Yeah.
Um. Okay. So let's get into the landscape of 90 plus SAS decks, and I think this is actually going to be really, really fun here. Um, because there's a lot of crazy stats around them, and you already mentioned one, which
That
is
is what drew my attention the most, yeah.
yeah, no Worlds Collide Brobnar SAS decks. Um, but let's kind of dig into some of these other ones. Um, I think we can slice it a few different ways. We have kind of statistics by set, the statistics by house. Um,
I like starting with this overall because this is a number that I didn't look up, so you have it here for us. This 1,400.
yeah,
Um, I don't see the number. Do we how many decks are there right now? I lost track a long time ago. I
it's
stopped, like,
2.8 million something.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
2.8 million decks in the world, so almost 3 million, and there are only 1,400 decks over 90 SAS, so it's 1,407. So like right at 1,400. I mean, that just tells you something right there. Like there are 5,000, like 5 to 6,000 very active players. We know this from the game found. So not every person that is very active, because like that's generally what most of our game found pledges were, own a 90 SAS deck. So like,
That's a
and
great
then
point. That's only like 5 in every 10,000 decks is SAS
yeah,
90. Yeah.
for sure. And like, so that's just saying something right there. Because I think a lot of people just kind of take for granted like certain decks that they have that are 90 or whatnot. Um, like, be aware, like you are one of these 1,407 people, and a lot of people do have more than one. So, like, I reckon it is actually probably under 1,000 people. And remember, like a lot of these, we don't even know if anyone even like
Right.
active owns them,
Yeah.
right? So, like, if you have one, like, you are probably under one of 1,000 people that has a 90 SAS deck at all, like, period.
Yeah, that's a great point.
And because of the like that, like that rate of where they're getting them, there's not a lot that are coming in. Like, I think somewhere around 30 to 40 like thousand decks were sold for that $1 sale between Worlds Collide and MM, and I checked every day and tagged every deck for 30 days, and it was only 50.
Wow.
Like, like so, like, if you'd spent like 40 grand, you would have gotten 50 90 plus S decks.
Yeah, that is pretty crazy.
And that's at $1 each. Like, that normally would have been $400,000.
Yeah.
In the future, that'd be like $520,000. Like, that's like getting a 90 SAS deck is a feat in itself that I think people kind of take for granted.
Yeah, that's really good context there.
Yeah, because like
Um,
I personally have never opened one. Like I have some, I bought them all secondhand, and I have opened a lot of decks. I have never opened a 90 SAS. I don't even know if I've gotten higher than 85 as far as like personally opening a deck.
yeah, I think I've only opened one. I was pretty lucky, and I've opened a lot of decks too.
Yeah, so
Okay.
I think like sometimes our community just kind of takes certain numbers for granted as far as like the quality of decks that they're seeing and getting.
No, I think you're
Um,
right. I mean, obviously, it's a very competitive, very fanatical group in all the discords. We're nuts, and because we love the game and we love Keyforge, we want the highest power stuff. But I mean, you look at some of the discords, and there's 500 people in them, but there was
yeah,
6,000 backers on GameFound, and plus thousands of others that have played this game. Not everybody is as crazy as us.
yeah, that's for sure. And it's fun to open decks, right? So like
It's lots of
that
fun.
helps. That
Yeah, it's
uh,
addictive.
all right, do you want to start talking about like what kind of pack rates for 90s we're gonna get in these sets?
Definitely. What's up, Jupiter? Thanks for joining us. Shout
Hey,
outs to
buddy.
everybody else. Orion, Murph, Clinton, Dinobot. Nice to see you all there. Okay, let's get in the sets. Yeah, and so what's interesting here is kind of the distribution, of course. Um, Obviously, Coda, it's got 1.2 million out of that 2.8 million registered. 1.2 million of those are Coda, and out of those, it's got 331 decks, which is about 26 out of every 10,000 decks.
Yeah.
So it's doing decent, but we'll
And
get to something later, which is even better.
before we move on to that, so it's like 26 out of 10,000. So that's actually a fairly low like rate to pop a 90. But I think what's important to note before we move on from there, like that is Coda. There's only 331 90 plus decks right now, and out of all of the sets, like you're not gonna find Coda in the stores anymore. Like that's just not a thing. Like
Yeah.
you can find Coda packs open on eBay or whatever. Some people probably still have them in the garage. I know tons of people that just have that box that they kept. I think I probably have a box around here somewhere. But in general, we're not going to see like someone open up 1,000 Dakota decks and scan them over a weekend. Like that's just not going to be a thing anymore. So the odds that we move on like from like the 331 to even hitting 350 is very low. Like I mean, if you've got a 90 plus SAS Coda deck, which that is where the SAS is the most accurate, like I think you have something that is actually fairly valuable given where we all hope the trajectory of our game is going. Like this is the alpha equivalent, right?
Yeah.
And like you have a system designed based on that set saying this is real, real good. It is most likely going to stay pretty dang good for a long time. So you have like a piece of Keyforge history per se, and you know it's good. Um, that's kind of cool. If you have one of those 331 Coda decks, like be happy about it. Don't sell it unless you want to sell it to me.
Yeah, and what's interesting also is how SAS has kind of evolved over time, right? There used to be at one point a lot more, but Nova did kind of listen to um, all everybody who kind of follows SAS and at one point kind of rebased it. And now that
Yeah,
we have kind of some heavier hitters and Worlds Collide and Mass Mutations, getting a 90 SAS Coda deck, to your point, it's a gem.
yeah.
It,
I mean, again, like that number, that's 331, and it's basically not going up much ever. Like
yep.
that's cool. And then
Now,
all
yeah,
yeah.
go ahead.
Well, and then like moving on to AOA, like this is what 600,000, so 600,000 registered decks, and there's only 73. And that pulls down your rate to 12 out of every 10,000 decks. Like that's less than half the rate of Coda as far as opening in 90 plus. And as we just talked about, we did put a lot of work into AOA seeing those high hitting game winning combos. It's just hard because even some of those best decks that are in AOA, they still don't hit that 90 number. Some of them do.
Yeah.
But a lot of those, like a lot of the best AOA decks, like sit around in the 80s, the high 80s, the mid 80s. But they just don't hit those top numbers. But even like those 73 decks that are in that 90 range in AOA, I've seen a lot of those, and they are pretty good. They fire at a very high rate, very similar to the Coda because they're based on the same metrics, very similar concepts going on when we design those arcs, and they all play very very fast, very pushing the objective real quick.
Yeah, the high SAS AOA decks are so good. One thing that I feel like they're better than Coda at is board control, which is even more important with Worlds Collide, Mass Mutations, DT. Um, but you're right. You're not gonna be opening those very often. Um, I mean, AOA has kind of always been the punching bag for
Yeah.
people talking about competitive decks. Um, and even with kind of all those cheap decks that have been out there for a long time, not a lot of, super high SAS decks being opened.
I'm still happy with where I predicted AOA in the long run. A long, long, long time ago, I predicted that AOA would produce some of the best decks in the world and some of like large, large quantities of very mediocre to poor decks. That is exactly what this set did.
Yeah.
Um, some of the literal best decks on the planet came from this set, and they have performed very well. They are still very hard to deal with. Because like when they go into their Jinka turn with double Martian generosity in deck, like all you can do is sit there and watch them and hope they get very unlucky, like super unlucky,
Yeah.
and then the game is over. So like, and those decks exist; they are out there, and that is another one of the reasons why I look for those disruptive cards. Like, can I throw a wrench into my opponent's objectives? And AOA is the number one reason to this day why I still have a very large fondness for disruptive type decks.
No, I agree. Those combo decks, I think AOA has them. I think DT also has them. And Disruption is going to be like that. And I think DT, to me, has a lot of similarity to AOA. There's going to be some combo decks that are going to just be nuts. But then the majority probably won't do that much. Just too many commons like AOA that just don't do much. Um, we see in chat, Floximal, aka Orion, says he rolled one of the 90 plus AOA decks for the ABR sealed week. It was a monster. Very nice.
Yeah, yeah, great stuff in there.
Yep.
Um, Talk to us about Worlds Collide.
Yeah, so Worlds Collide, obviously we saw it when it came out. There was a huge kind of step up in power level, and we also saw that it could take down some of these Coda monsters that were just dominating. And we see that also in the SAS. So out of the 462,000 registered decks, um, actually the latest number is 595 decks over 90 SAS, which is
Nice.
equivalent to about 128 out of every 1,000 decks or 10,000 decks. So that's like 5 times Coda or
Yeah.
10 times AOA.
Yeah, so that's insane. Like, I don't people know if people like understand just how like if you're buying a lottery ticket, right? Because freaking Keyforge decks are lottery tickets. That's all they are.
Yeah,
Like you're trying to get that thing for to hit as hot as possible. Like one Worlds Collide deck is worth five, Coda lottery tickets. One Worlds Collide deck is worth 10 AOA lottery tickets, just in the terms of value. Now we just talked about like some of the Saurian stuff. Some of this is skewed because Saurian in as a whole, as a house, hits higher on SAS, so therefore generates higher on like the higher chance you'll get that 90 deck. But those decks still like wreck face. Like people like forget by and large the very first Archon event that was a vault competition after Worlds Collide released was won by a Worlds Collide deck.
that's amazing. And
Like
then
the
by
first one. It's
yeah, and by then there wasn't even that many opened, right? So
No, no, it was
yeah,
not this number by any means. And at the time, like based on the number of Coda that was open, and even AOA was still like people were still buying a lot of AOA. Like it was probably like 20% of the like registered decks at the time at most, as far as the numbers in circulation. And yeah, 591 out of that many, 128 out of the 10,000. I just did some quick math. Like that, this means that 42% of all of the 90 SAS Plus decks in the world are Worlds Collide
wow.
alone from that
Yep,
one set. Um,
that's
so
nuts.
yeah, if you're just looking to get some good decks in your collection, Worlds Collide is mathematically the best lottery ticket to buy, and whether it has dinos or not, it still does the job. Like like one of my decks has double Tribune Pompatus. That's just an uncommon. It's not that hard for that to happen, and just that makes stuff stupid. Like
Yep.
there's just tons of that going on.
Yeah, definitely. But coming up right behind Worlds Collide is actually Mass
Mhm.
Mutations. And honestly, I do think it's on level or maybe even a little bit better. Um, that's my personal opinion. I'd love to hear your take. But there's about
Yeah,
340,000 registered decks for Mass Mutations, and let's see, live number is 407 over 90, which it's a little bit behind Worlds Collide. It's 119 or so out of every 10,000 decks, whereas World Collides was 128. But kind of at that same level.
so now that I think about that a little bit closer, because I know that like some of the Saurian is pumped up in Worlds Collide. That is not nearly as true for MM. There are some still high rated MM cards as far as like Arkansas goes that are dinos, but for the most part, a lot of the dinos cards are low SAS because a lot of the dino cards in MM just suck. Like they're not good. So you're not going to get like a too many overly SAS decks coming from MM because of dinos. There is a chance, though, a very real chance that the 90 plus decks that we're getting from MM have just a higher validity of being in that 90 plus S bucket in general. I don't think it's enough to overtake Worlds Collide as far as like a true value, but it is probably enough differential for that to be basically equivalent as far as like
Yeah.
which set you're buying.
The other interesting thing, at least for me in my experience for Mass Mutation, is I feel like the bottom is much higher for Mass
Hmm.
Mutations. Like there's a lot of shitty Worlds Collide decks, right? Obviously,
Well, there's
we've talked about Brobnar, of course, but
I was
even
about
like
to say
un
43% of them are bad because 43% of decks have Brobnar in Worlds Collide. That's just the
right,
number.
yeah. But
But
also like
yeah,
Untamed can be like atrocious in Worlds Collide.
yeah.
And I feel like on average, mass mutations, you open a display of mass mutations, you'll be happier than a display of Worlds Collide,
for sure, for
even
sure.
if the top isn't as high.
Although people often do forget, like the Saurians are very underwhelming as a whole. They're not Brahm nor Worlds Collide, but they are underwhelming. And in addition to that, quite often shadows, unless you have pennies and bonithines, are just bad. Like they don't have too much to protect. Like they don't have a lot of like single card steal.
Yeah.
Um, so if you don't have bonithine and red pennies, like the shadows is mostly bad. So I think people kind of miss that, but I think it just hits higher. And to be honest, like it's just more fun to play than these other sets most of
That's
the time.
true.
It's fun to see where the pips go.
Oh,
You've
lots
got
of
the
fun.
giant creatures, whether they're good or not. You've got the sins. Like half of them are good. Like it
Yeah.
just has a lot going on that is engaging to the players and fun to play.
No, I agree. Enhancements to me is the best thing that ever done from a design standpoint. Every deck is even more unique, and seeing where they
True.
drop is so exciting.
Yep.
So cool.
By far my favorite set. Like it
Yep.
is just the most fun set.
And now we
Um,
get to the redheaded stepchild, DT.
the one we just want to forget about. There are six. Six decks of 90 plus stats or above. And again, as I said earlier, that's just rolling really high on those D20s. Because it doesn't mean anything. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, 3.6 out of every 10,000 decks. So basically, you have almost no chance of randomly opening a 90 plus SAS DT deck. But don't sweat that because it didn't mean anything anyway.
That's true. Yeah, that's
It's,
a less than a quarter of the AOA chance to get one, and so
yeah,
which is already really bad.
I have played all six of these DT decks. I don't like any of them. So, I mean, like, I'm not saying they can't win games or they're not, like, at least above average as far as a competitive deck goes, but none of them are in, like, the A minus range. Like, not even A. Like, A minus is something that I would be confident with going to a vault, but it's, like, missing just one element to be, like, great, great, and none of those 6 decks even hit that range.
Right.
So, like, that's just rough.
Whereas I've totally seen broken decks that are like 70 somethings. So yeah,
I mean,
DT needs some work.
I think the best DT deck I have seen played, was a 67. Like, it's just again, SAS just doesn't see it,
Yeah.
won't see it. It's not I'll let you guys know, DT is not being worked on. So, if you're just hoping one day SAS is just gonna magically get better for Dark Tidings, I'm not saying it won't, but I wouldn't hold your breath.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing. It's like there's so many combos in DT that are 3 cards plus that just aren't being captured. So
It just wasn't designed to do that.
yep.
So, um, what we got next?
Now we're gonna get to the house statistics, and this is also very crazy. Um, similar to the zero Worlds Collide Brobnar decks, one of the craziest stats that I've seen out of this is that Logos has roughly 85% of all decks that are over 90 SAS, which is just nuts to me.
It's the best house. It does the most things. I mean, as much as people talk about like the amber swings with shadows or the dominance of like certain tricky things that Worlds Collide Saurians did that can win games, or even Jinka back in the day, like all of these things that I just mentioned is not nearly as good is if you cannot move through your deck, archive, build a big hand, set up a turn. And Logos does that. It makes good decks better. So
Definitely.
yes, 85% of all 90 plus SAS decks have Logos.
As Jupiter says, speed kills.
Speed kills and maybe it turns cards. Like
Yeah.
if I play 2 cards to every 1 card you play, I'm probably gonna win the game. Like it's just
Well,
um
all the important creature control, amber generation, all that, you can just get to it faster.
mhm. Well, and the house itself isn't dead in almost any set
Yeah.
except Dark Tidings. Like it can deal damage. It's got like bouncing death quirk, neutron shark for artifact control. It's got all of the things to some extent, as far as like pushing the objective of the game on top of being the most efficient house in the game. So it's not like giving up a lot to also have these things that you need to make everything else better.
Yeah, it's got it all.
Yep.
All right, moving
Uh,
on to Dis.
mhm.
Dis is coming up second. It's got over 55% of all decks that are over 90 SAS with Dis.
See, this one surprised me. I thought it could be higher because I know like Dark Tides only generated 6 decks anyway. So the fact that it's not in Dark Tides didn't change anything,
Right.
not measurably. 56% is obviously over half of the pool. But as dominant as people like talk about this with like either whether it be Control of the Week back in the day, or Infernus in the current meta, or Jar from MM, uh, like there are 44% of the other decks out there that don't even have the house represented at all. So that was kind of interesting to see that there are enough other houses that are stepping up to make very powerful decks without this. Because this gets talked about, like honestly, I think people talk about this more than the logos. So it's good to see that like, this is actually shared out. Like they actually see that logos is the driving force of most of the top decks in the world by a lot.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think the disruption hurts more when you're playing against it, right? So when they purge that card of yours or when they
Hmm.
discard it out of your hand, that hurts a lot more. Um, but I also
It may,
think, although this was like really good in Coda and is amazing in Mass Mutations, in Worlds Collide, it had a bunch of crappy commons. Now it could produce those wild decks that were nuts with lots of Infernus and Hysteria and Exhumes,
yeah.
but it had a lot of crappy commons as well.
That's true, it did. Like, basically, you just hoped you had EE to purge all the crap cards out of your
Yeah,
deck. That's true. It had a lot of, like I mean, there's only a handful of decks where Buzzle's any good, but Buzzle seems to be in all the decks.
right.
Like, it's just rough. And then there's those, like, the Dendrix, like, all those cards, like, those are just
Yeah,
straight trash.
yeah. Misery Exploit.
Mhm. Oh, yeah. Ugh, hated that one.
All right.
Um Yeah, now we have the big boys. We have Saurian at 612, which is 44%. And that's where it'd be interesting to see, like, because obviously Saurian didn't come out until, Worlds Collide, and it didn't generate decks at Dark Titan because Dark Titan just didn't generate. So we are getting these 612 decks from two sets.
It's true.
So that is a huge percentage to generate as far as 90 plus SAS. Yet one more indicator that is showing us SAS is inflated for this house relatively.
Yeah, it is true. Although, when you take a look at the SAS 90 decks already, Worlds Collide and Mass Mutation, they have 71% of all of them.
Well,
So
that's true.
it may be inflated, but it also, most of the SAS 90 decks come from those sets.
Yeah,
So Coda and AOA just don't have as many.
yeah, very very few. Because I guess if you add up AOA and Coda, you match MM, but you still don't like really come close to Worlds Collide
Right.
alone.
And then we get on the Star Alliance. Now, Star Alliance came out with a bang in Worlds Collide. It was just nuts. I think it tamed down a little bit in Mass Mutations. It's pretty good in
I don't
DC.
know. Subject Kirby is real good.
It is good, but there's a ton of crappy comments in Mass Mutations.
Yeah, that's true. Yep, you get a lot of Tinks and Yorgs and all those other things.
But it's coming out of right around 39%. So about 4 or 5% less than Saurian.
Mhm.
They've, of course, been in the same sets. Um, but kind of overall, do you think that's accurate? There's more good Saurian decks and Star Alliance decks?
Honestly, I think those 2 houses truly are equal. So, like, if some of the Saurian stuff was nerfed just a little bit, they would be perfectly equal, and that's what we would see. Like, I think these 2 houses, as far as their power level, are very, very close. I think the only
Yeah.
place where you would see a huge discrepancy, um, is Dark Tidings, oddly enough, because Star
Yeah,
Alliance is one of the best houses in Dark Tidings,
definitely,
and that's
easily.
not going to be represented here. Because out of all 7 houses, Star Alliance probably is the best house in Dark Tidings, but it would be really close because Untamed is really good there too.
Yep.
Um, so, but I think those like in actual play value should match. So I would like what is 612 from 545. There probably are 60 Saurian decks somewhere that should be like 87, 86, 88, and that would be right in line with where they should be.
Yeah. No, I think I agree with that. They're pretty even. Um,
Yeah.
Then we get on the Shadows. Of course, Shadows was dominant in the Coda days and even in AOA, but
Hmm.
it's been a little bit weak since then. And so it
Yeah.
comes in just about 500 decks, just over 35%. So about 3%, 4% less than Star Alliance.
Yeah. I mean, after Coda and AOA, it took a huge hit because Shadows in Worlds Collide was really, really bad. Pretty much all of the cards were pretty like subpar compared to what we had before, unless you got Ronnie and Team TP.
Yep.
That's it, like what you needed. If you didn't get that, it was mostly a bust because all the other commons were not great. It was kind of cool having a Hawk, so I got to give that some credit. So there's like 3 cards you're looking for, and then it kind of kept that trend. Like moving on into MM, I already said it. Basically, it's Rad Penny, Bo Nithing. You might want a safe house or bust. Like, that's
Yeah.
it. You really don't want anything else there. There's some weird stuff you can do with Pencerator, but again, you would kind of also need to have the Rad Pennies, um,
Now, the
or
one
you
thing
just
in
whip.
Worlds Collide and Mass Mutation that Shadows has ramped up that I like is the disruption, like the subtle chains, the
Mm,
vandalize, the subtle auto. Um, to me, those are actually pretty good, especially vandalize, especially subtle chain. You get a
yeah,
discard and a pip.
I do like that they carried forward because, like back in the day, they had Subtle Maw, and they've kind
Yep.
of kept it in there to have like some element of it in each set. So that part's kind of nice. I like that. Although I would much prefer like what they
Oh,
had
the
in
stealing.
AOA. Like I really liked the Merkins effect and the fidget effect. I wish they had like went more that direction
Yeah.
instead of the subtle direction because that's just fun. Like um,
Merkins is one of the funnest cards out there.
yeah, for sure. Just crazy stuff happens, and it's always fun to win or lose a game that way.
I do love
Uh,
that Brend has been in the last 3 sets. Is that right? No, 3 out of 4. Just because like I find it a very good card if you can kind of it's skill testing to make sure that it can go off, but
yeah,
it's very rewarding when it does.
yeah. It skipped MM, but it was in the other 3.
Yeah.
MM would have been interesting.
What's that?
Lots of what MM would have been interesting with all the damage pips. It would have been very easy to kill.
The true. Yep, yep.
Which might be why they decided not to.
Yeah.
Type of cheat. Their infinite wisdom does that stuff. Um,
On the
so as
Untamed.
Untamed, what we have 401. That's almost 30% at 28.5%. And this is just like started at the top of the top. They were one of the best sets and like best houses we had in Coda, and it just kind of went down all the way until DT, and then they spiked back up.
Yep,
Like I don't really, I well in AOA they were just real bad, like a complete opposite of what it was in Coda. World Collide, you had like the unnatural board wipe for where you kept 3, so that was fun. You still had a key cheat in there,
yeah,
but you still didn't generate that much amber. You had Flaxia. I think we still had Nature's Call at that point, so like that was really what you wanted the most.
definitely.
And then
Nature's Call with the Mussuk Murmuk, Regrowth with the
mhm,
Mussuk Murmuk and the
yeah.
Flaxia could do some damage, but most of the commons were still pretty bad.
And then in MM, it's kind of like all over the place. You get a ton of pips with Amber pips, so like that part of it made it still good. If you're one of the people that loves trying to go for the Dark Harbinger combo that almost never works, like you might like that. Um, But I mean, the best thing I see in Untamed MM was like the punctuated plus the auto encoder, which is game winning sometimes. Um, and the fact that like you could actually get a lot of the value from MM with not ever playing those cards, like they give you the pips are distributed, then you like use your subject Kirby's or
Yeah.
you like Letho from MM in your logos house to just not play that house. Like there's a lot of hidden value in Untamed and MM by like not playing Untamed. So
Yeah, and I feel like mass mutation brought back some of the witches that you just had to get rid of that like Worlds Collide didn't really have with Fandangle.
yeah, yeah, Fandangle's super fun,
Yeah,
and you could pump her up too because you can make her really big in that set with rapid.
Rapid Evolution. Yeah,
Yep. Mhm. And then you get the Dark Tidings, where it is actually one of the best houses of Dark Tidings, but
yeah,
you still need a lot to go right for that to work, but it does generate a ton of amber and has a artifact removal at common. So with the on a creature, play a creature, destroy an artifact. Sounds good.
and lots of recursion too, so you can keep doing it. Yep.
Yes, yes.
All right, on this Sanctum. Sanctum just under 100 decks or only 6.75%. So a huge kind of step down from the top 6 here. Um and you had mentioned this actually when we first were talking about possibly going and talking about SAS in DataForge that there's only 95 Sanctum decks that are 90 plus while it's in 4 sets, and
Yeah,
Mars
it's
produced almost 80 when it only being in 2 sets.
yeah, like it's twice as many sets as Mars. Mars produced almost the same amount of decks. It's like a 15 deck difference, and just didn't have that time. And I know the reason on this one. I don't entirely agree with a lot of the arcs for the Sanctum. Nova really doesn't like Sanctum. Doesn't like that like slower grinding playstyle, and that's what Sanctum does. It builds a board, bodies your opponent, so you have to fight more than you would expect to. If you want to control the board in Sanctum, because it's going to be like Smite, Grey Rider, just big people with armor fighting into smaller people. Um, that is kind of like the Sanctum, like that's what Sanctum does. It is good at it.
Yep.
SAS does not value that at all. So you're gonna have a lot of low arc creatures in the set. So not gonna. It's really hard for it to hit 90. So a lot of those decks that are hitting 90 um, probably aren't hitting 90 because of Sanctum. They're most likely have a lot of real high arcs in the other two houses.
Yeah, and that makes sense. Because fighting and keeping a board, if you're up against something that's got lots of creature control, it doesn't really get you anything. Um, but Sanctum now interesting. It's always had a lot of interesting types of burst. It started with Cleansing Wave and Virtuous Works. It got the free markets. Now it's got Strange Ordination. There are some crazy decks out there with lots of Sanctum bursts, which are interesting.
Yeah,
Um, but and then it's also got lots of nice disruption with the Master of the Gray, the Barrister Joya, um, some things that really like Master of the Gray can really cripple some decks.
yeah. I think I would throw Sir Morrow's in there too. Like he's the. I think that's when they capture like the reap changes or something, right? That's another one that messes
Yep.
things up.
Yep.
Um, yeah, lots of weird stuff going on. But again, it is reliant purely on a board where you have to kind of body your opponent off if you're going to win that way. And SAS does not appreciate the value of that. Um, I'm not saying that that's like a super great win con because it's not. Like we all kind of know that.
Yeah.
I'm just saying the arc is probably underrepresented from what I think the value should be, just not by a lot, but enough to probably change the number of Sanctum decks from 95 to maybe, I don't know, 120, 130. It would not be enough for it to catch something.
Yeah, and Orion mentions that, it really needs to combine with the right other stuff to be good. So on its own, it rarely brings a value.
Like, in my opinion, it would have made way more sense for this house to have Ward from the beginning because that, like, thematically makes sense. Like, some kind of
Yeah.
like angelic warding over their people. Why the dinos have some kind of magical ward at all never made sense to me. They're already big. They're already bigger than the freaking giants.
Totally.
Um, so like I think that would have helped them out a ton. Like cards like Imperium, Ancient Power, like that all actually makes more thematic sense for Sanctum.
Definitely.
But but that's not where we found it. So like
Yeah.
Ward would help them a ton, and they would have been a much more competitive house.
Ketzer calls out Harmonic Ritual and Double Grade Rider also for some burst. But
Double
yeah.
Grade Rider always was fun.
Yep. So we mentioned it, going on to Mars is right around 80 decks or about 5.6%. Of course, it's only been in 2 sets.
Yeah, 2 sets, 80 decks. Had we seen more sets, we probably would hit a lot more 90s. Um, However, we did open a lot in those 2 sets, so I do wish it was higher. Part of that was
Yeah,
like AOA just hits a lot lower unless it's combo, and even those like some of those best Mars decks in the world that are in AOA still aren't 90s. So like we did our work to get it in that 85 to 89 range, but we still couldn't find a way to really put it in to those 90 ranges, even though we know they're great decks. It's just like it would break too much other things if we tried that, like Force did.
well, yeah,
Uh,
and uh, if you don't have the combo, they're all board focused too, right?
for sure.
You they
Mostly.
I feel like half of the decks that I open in AOA Mars is like it's got 10 creatures.
Yeah, it's got 10 creatures and a lot of us learned other than the combo decks, like if you didn't have Mars first, Squawker, Soft Landing, like the Compod, that was a great one. Like if you didn't
Yeah,
have those cards though, these creatures will never do anything. They're all witches. Like they will throw everything they've got to kill these things every time because you're just like they cannot let you use John Smith, Mind Warper, Proliferator, like
totally.
Zookeeper. They're all great,
Yep,
but they just don't ever get used because they're super easy to kill. Especially now, like you're facing MM. Oh, pip, 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 dead.
yep.
Like it's just over. But this is my second favorite house. I've always enjoyed playing Mars. I like the weird mechanisms they use because they have efficiency, but you have to create like secondary objectives to do it, like gather up Mars cards, sacrifice Amber, like that kind of thing. Even back to the physics, you had to like archive a creature specifically, and then he
Yeah.
grows, making it more likely you'll do that again. Like I really did love the way Mars played. I'm hoping we see like some of the mechanics we saw later hit the Mars creatures going forward. Because as soon as we got Star Alliance and Saurian, we're like, okay, creatures are just too slow. And what how they fix this? Play fight reap. It was
Yeah.
wonderful. Creatures do something finally. Like no matter what, they at least did this thing. Um, like if you took half of the Mars creatures I just talked about, gave them play fight reap, not only would their SASs be entirely different, you're going to see a lot more Mars numbers. That entire house becomes a lot more playable, and you just have an immediate impact on the field. Because, like, if Zookeeper has that effect on
Hmm.
play, oh dang, like that's crazy, right?
That
Like
would be fun.
that, yeah. But like, who's to say that that's not even as good as either of the Kirby's? Because the Kirby's like effect is wild on the game. Like so, I don't think that would have been too much of a stretch to do. It's just at the time, like at the core of the game, like that's they didn't know how powerful creatures were going to be or how easy they were going to be to address. So
No, I agree. And Mars is a lot of fun. Lots of great effects. And Orion says, just wait for Winds of Exchange. Get ready to watch those Mars and Brobnar numbers start spiking. And I hope
yeah,
so. One of the cool spoilers, of course, was that creature that readies both of their neighbors,
yep,
which could
yep.
be really nuts in Mars. I hope it is. We'll
hmm
have to see
Oh,
what else they
yeah,
have.
and that's what I was talking about. Like the new John Smith is basically um, double squawker. Like you don't get the pip, but you get the ready things and get to use more of your stuff.
Yeah,
So, like, give me Zookeeper back. Zookeeper, that guy. I'm gonna hit you twice with this shenanigan power.
definitely.
Uh, be super fun. Uh,
All right.
oh, Robnar.
On to Brobnar. 16
Big
decks. Only 16.
in 3 sets, the three most printed sets. So that is 2.2 million decks. And we have 16 90 plus SAS Bromnar.
It's 1% of all the 90 cess decks, and as Z mentioned before, no Worlds Collide ones.
And the best Brobnar deck in the entire world is actually an 82. So
Is that the Genka one?
uh, that's um that's Caruso, Chef, Des out, you
Oh.
boots. That deck never calls Brobnar, like almost never calls Brobnar.
Oh, the best Worlds
That's
Collide, yeah.
Yep, that's how you get to be the best Brobnar deck. Just don't ever call the house.
I do like. I actually started out in Coda not liking Brobnar, but it really grew on me. And by AOA, I love Brobnar, and I took a Store's championship in AOA with a Brobnar deck in AOA, taking out a bunch of Coda decks. So I got a lot of love for it, even though it's definitely rough around the edges. And they just did it dirty in Worlds Collide. So I'm hoping it comes back strong.
And before the Rev messes with me about not saying his deck's the best in the world that has Brobnar, it's just not as good as the other one. I'm sorry. It's good. Sasha is real good. But it's not. It's not. It's not Crusoe.
Okay, and then we're on to our last house.
Like this.
Unfathomable.
This is legit. Like when people talk about World's Club Brobnar, and yes, I 100% agree that is the worst house of any set. This is the worst house. Period. Like it is designed so poorly. It makes me angry. And again, 43% of that house is in that set too. So, I mean, like there are great cards in the house, but it has two core mechanisms that literally fight against each other. Like it doesn't matter if the creatures are exhausted if I'm going to return them to the deck and vice versa.
Yeah.
And you get half and half most of the time. If somehow you manage to get all of them matching each other, you have an okay house at best. Because for whatever reason, almost all those cards also don't have a pip on them. It's a very very rough house. It was not designed well.
And it's only got one 90 SAS deck. I
That's
haven't checked it out.
surprise.
Um, have you checked out that
Um,
deck?
if it's on there, I played it. I don't remember it specifically offhand at the moment, but I played all. I guess there might be a new one. I think I have only played 5.
Well, let's check it out really quick. It is Zatwardziale Brodka. Looks to be potentially Polish. 93 SAS, Logos, Unfathomable, Untamed, Double Trilonia, Deepwater Gruen. The Unfathomable is 26 SAS. It's got Abandoned Ship, Chew Call of the Voids, Bubbles, A Chosen One, and nothing else super exciting. The Logos is 30 and the Untamed is 32. It's got a punctuated equilibrium. Yeah.
Yeah, I've definitely played this. It loses because the Unfathomable House doesn't do much. Like it just doesn't. Like outside of the Chosen One, Bubbles, and the Abandoned Ship, you have a bunch of creatures that are just not going to generate much effect. Um, at the high, and I'm talking about like actual high level competitive play, right? So like, you have to be able to establish a win con fairly quickly, or apply it, apply pressure or answer pressure. It doesn't do either of those terribly great.
Yeah, and it's sad too because it does have some really cool cards in it. It's got a cool theme. I feel like with just a little bit more iterations, it could have been a good, solid house. Um, Not the best, but still solid, right?
Yeah, that's true, but they didn't do.
Yep. So that's all the houses. Kind of taking a look. We talked about logos being over 1,000, discs being almost 800. Out of all the decks, over 600 of the 1,400 contain both logos and discs. So over 43% of all decks that are over 90 SAS contain both logo and discs, which is also
Real
pretty
good
nuts.
combination. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I remember when they were doing the oubliette. Basically, like that's one where you like
Hmm.
ban a house and like your opponent can't play that. it's like deciding whether or not to ban one of these 2 because that immediately takes that, but then it takes away from you too. So it's real hard to make a any kind of competitive event and say don't bring logos discs. Like
Yeah.
if you look at your collection right now, if you don't bring logos or discs, like going through what you have left is probably a really, really small number of decks you have actively played and played well.
No, that's totally true. And I remember even for Oubliette for the Ancient Bear Republic League, I specifically look for non logos and discs. Oh, what do I have that doesn't have either of those so that I can, ban one of those or something? It's
And
not
you
pretty.
yeah, it's sad. Like, you end up with some real sad options,
Yeah.
I guess I played this in sealed once and it did okay,
Yeah.
and then I never played it again.
And what's even crazier for SAS is for over 90 SAS, only 48 decks contain neither logos nor discs.
Out of all of them. So, yeah, like, that is a really low percentage.
Yep.
It's, um, wow. Yeah, that is basically saying you have to have one of these to be competitive in as a driver in this game.
Okay. We've been going for a little over an hour. The next up that we're going to talk about is SAS through the sets, and we can do this a little bit quicker if you want. Um, Kind of what we wanted to do here is really take a look at the highest and lowest arc for cards from each set and see if it still kind of holds true.
Sure.
Um,
I've got the Coda pulled up. So, highest art cards in Coda. We'll just talk about the top 3. We've got Control the Weak, Neutron Shark, and Nature's Call. I mean, I don't see anything that has hurt the value on any of these. Control the Weak is still game winning at times, especially in multiples. Um, Neutron Shark for me might actually be higher than Control the Weak. Artifacts are running wild right now in the meta. From autoencoder to dab to jar, like you have to be able to answer these things, or they can just shut down everything you're doing sometimes. And then Nature's Call. It just keeps getting better. They keep printing more and more and more ways to capture things and capture things in mass. Nature's Call kind of like stops all that. It is less valuable against play effect creatures, but Nature's Call is really good in general against Worlds Collide, Dark Tidings, other coded decks. Really good against AOA because none of their creatures do anything.
yep.
Um, and then, of course, if you have your own Dust Pixies, like that's just money in the bank. So I think all 3 of these probably still deserve their spot in the sun. I'm not sure if it's in this order anymore. Like Neutron Shark is really, really good. Like often they have more than one artifact that is doing a lot of work. Um,
It's true, but you don't always get it off twice. Most of the times you do,
that's true.
but
That's true.
but yeah, I took a look at the top 10 really quick. Like all of these cards are still straight value. So kind of yeah, I wouldn't change much at all. Kind of in the
Yeah,
top
for sure.
four Coda here.
I mean, I'd give an honorable mention to Graft, which I think is 5th. Probably should be higher than that, mainly because we have more steel hate in total in the game than there was before.
Yep.
So just the fact that Graft doesn't have the word steel on it, I think its value has increased over time. Because now we do have Odoac, we have Cephalois, we have Discombobulator. Like, there's just additional ways to shut down steel. Because before, all we had was Vault Keeper and Pose Pixies. Pose Pixies super easy to kill. Vault Keeper's in Sanctum, so you're not going to see that anyway.
Right. And Graft, I
So,
think, is also more valuable too with all the key cost increases. Can
oh, for
pump
sure.
up their Amber and then take it all with Graft.
Hope we really need to talk about the bottom cards. The bottom cards are obviously still bad.
Yeah, Gromed, Key of Darkness, Hollow Blaster, Pocket Universe, Phosphorus Stars. Actually, Phosphorus Stars I think is a lot better now.
It can be. I don't know if we know if it's in Woe yet or not, but that could be a
Yeah, I
thing.
don't
'Cause
know.
if you have a Mars token, especially if it's the grunt with all the 3 power bodies, it could be interesting to just outbody your opponent with an army of grunts and then stun them constantly. Still wouldn't
Yeah,
want it in set because, like, I still never knew why this thing had chains. Still
right.
don't know why it has chains. It should not have chains.
It was so
Uh,
bad in Coda and AOA. I mean,
yeah.
because Worlds Collide Mass Mutations DT is so board focused, it's a little bit better. But yeah,
Mhm.
it still hurts to play with the chains.
Yeah, yeah, no, this is not worth the chains most of the time.
Yep,
AOA best cards, that's
yep.
interesting. Well, that's no shocker there.
The good one,
Uh,
Martian Generosity, of course.
yeah, best card in the set. Punctuate
Punctuated
Equilibrium.
Equilibrium, I totally disagree, at least with AOA. Now,
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. I was like, it is actually a great card, but it literally didn't matter in almost any AOA deck.
right.
And then you go, I guess like you'd have to go from Martian Generosity down to Ronnie. That's where we first saw Ronnie. It is a great card, probably better in the next set as well, but it is just straight value. That's it. Like, oh, Drummer Knock. You go all the way down to Drummer Knock.
Yep,
So yeah, those probably are the best three AOA cards in this order. Is Drummernaut, Ronnie, and then Martian and Rossi at the top.
yep. All right, on to the bottom of AOA. We got the same ones: Grommet, Key of Darkness, Pocket Universe, Bad Penny. Yep, these are all still pretty much the same.
One of their shards is on the floor. Yeah, there's two shards. The shards were bad.
Yep.
Wretched Doll was bad. That's here. Yeah,
That was awful.
bunch of bad.
Yep. Okay, on the Worlds Collide.
Lateral
Lateral
shift.
Shift.
It is like functionally the best card ever made, but it's not like a real card. So, yeah.
I'm actually
Um,
surprised that we haven't seen Mimicry in the top 10 or 15 because, a lot of people also claim that that's one of the like kind of the top cards. Lateral Shift and Mimicry.
yes, Mimicry is fantastic. I do love it. See, here's where I think we're actually already seeing what we talked about with the SAS thing, right? Like, if you knock out lateral shift and punctual equilibrium, like ignoring those because punk came from AOA and lateral shift's an anomaly, so it doesn't really count. Their first card would be Cincinnatus Rex, and their second card would be Spartasaur.
Right.
These are both good cards, but like
Are they
to
the
be
best
the
cards in the
best in
set?
the set? No,
No.
no, they're definitively not.
Yeah.
Like, this is Worlds Collide, so obviously Infernus made its shine here. Infernus is better than both of these cards. Like, that
Right.
is probably the best and most impactful card in the set, and Exhume would be right next to it. Because it's
And
not necessarily, because that's your Exhuming your Neutron, you're Exhuming your Ronnie, you're Exhuming your Infernus. Like,
right, those are always pure value, right? Whereas
hmm
Cincinnatus Rex, it's a combo card more or less. And
yeah.
yeah.
And you can't even play it to an empty board. And
Right.
there's a good chance, like, if they only have creatures of one house, they just call that turn, slam their creatures into Cincinnatus, and he dies anyway, no matter what their power was.
Yeah.
Like, like he is definitely not the best card in this set. So here is, and his arc is showing 2.6 to 7.1, and then right next to him is Spartasaur, which is showing an arc of 3.1 to 6.1. So there's a chance these two cards alone are making some decks hit 90 out there in the wild that should not be 90s.
Right. These like do nothing if they're played and immediately just killed, right?
Answered,
So,
yeah, yeah, just
yep.
like any other creature.
Yep.
Um, so if we go down further, there's a card I could probably agree on. Captain Valgerical is after those two dinos
Yeah.
the next highest unique card. She is by far, in my opinion, the best leader.
Well, and Data Forge also is, premiered in Worlds Collide. And as sad as I am to say it, being a host of Data Forge, it is definitely overrated here. I love
Oh, yeah.
getting off a Data Forge, but 1 to 8 arc. That's nuts. That's nuts.
I have played a ton of decks that have Data Forge and can hit Data Forge. It's not an 8 arc. Like, not even in those decks. Not even in the decks where this can fire is it hitting 8. Um, This is just like a whiff on trying to match what we saw with Key Abduction, and it just doesn't ever do that. Like, you don't have Martian Generosity or Battlefleet inside this house. Like,
Yeah.
not even Library Access, which isn't even in this set, can do that because you're simply replacing cards. You're not gaining cards, right?
Right.
So yeah, there's another thing that's slightly off, and that's in logos.
But yeah, Captain Valerico, you could even argue that might be a little bit higher because you can actually get some value on it the first time you play it, obviously depending on board state.
Yeah, yeah. Like I think this could probably go higher. I think this is more likely the other ones are just too high, and this is where she should have been
I agree. I agree.
at the top of this board, but still under Neutron Shark. And Lateral Shift. Lateral Shift is the best value card in the game. Nothing else does this. Like, there's nothing thing that is close to this. Like, you could look at their hand, pick the card, play their own control of the week on them. Like, it's busted.
And then not until 11th, 12th, and 14th you get to Calm Officer Kirby, Infernus, and Eddie, which I think Kirby and Infernus definitely should be higher than that.
Yeah, I don't even see Exhume. Like, where did it get put? Like, I'm still scrolling. Like,
Yeah, and
it's
Stealth
above
Mode is way
20.
down there.
Yeah, it's way down here. So, yeah, it's like the 30th card.
Yeah, that's
It
way
was
down there.
also in AOA, too. So, like, I don't know. I don't know what was going
Yeah.
on there.
Okay.
Alright.
On to the worst cards. Toad.
Hey,
Taking
it
over
wasn't
the
a problem,
bottom
man.
spot. And
Uh,
I actually disagree with the bottom Brobnar card, which is Power of Fire. It's
yeah,
sad, but
she hates
it's
this
actually
card.
one of their best Amber control cards. You put out a NARP and then you Power of Fire it.
In this set, it's almost their only. Like, they don't have a lot here. They have Grok, Power Fire. They have the one their creatures fight, they lose Amber, and that's, I think, it. Like, it was not a lot.
Probably an
Oh,
S.
and Berserker Slam, which is actually a good card.
Yeah, Berserker Sham's great. All right, on to Mass Mutation. Now this one I would disagree with. Ultra Gravitron and Decilus on
All right,
top.
so like this is just sorted the way it is. So we actually have to skip those because of the way the SAS sees this. We would be having these numbers. Um,
Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, like it is done that way right in the deck list. So this would really be 4.75 max and 4.2 max, which is below the next two cards.
It's true. It's still
So
pretty high, but
yeah.
and for a capture a kind came out and I think amazed everyone. It's definitely well deserved, way up there at the top.
Oh, for sure. Like this is one of those artifacts I was talking about. This is one of the artifacts was why I'm so high on Neutron Chart.
Right.
It's stuff like this. Like there are certain decks, if you can't answer this, your odds of winning the game just gets tanked so hard. Because they're gonna be able to do whatever they want on their turn and check you just enough consistently when it matters the most. And you're talking about in a set, not only is it putting 6 pips to do this effect, it's in the set that has the most pips anyway. Like it's just broken on broken. Like if this would been good if it was put in an earlier set where there is no cards that have enhancements other
Yeah.
than this one. But that's not the case. It's put in the one where you can have 20, 30. I don't know if there's actually 30, but like 20 plus enhancements easy, not counting, your aim.
Yeah, and it's like straight value by itself, and then you have the decks that can make you really pay, and it's just, load it up
Mhm.
on one creature and exile it or whatever, and it just gets
Yeah.
totally broken.
Yep. Yep. And then there is another game altering card,
Huge.
Jar. Eden's Jar. Like all of those decks that we just talked about in AoA, most Jinka decks don't have artifact control because it wasn't a common slot card for them. Um, so just calling Martian Generosity, you beat a lot of those decks. Going even back to Coda, there's lots of those 3, 4 control the weak decks, triple hunting witch decks, triple quadruple dust pixie decks. You just call that card, and they're wiped out. Like I mean, most decks in the game we play do not have artifact control. I don't know like how many people realize that because they're always searching for decks that do. But like out of the scope of all the decks, most don't.
Yeah.
So so cards like these two cards came out in MMM and just doubled down on an issue that was already in existence. There were already transporter platform decks that were crazy. There were already like stuff like that going on. Over abuse of Nepenthe Seed, when there's multiples in a deck and just crazy stuff happens. There's decks that chain life wards on you. Like those all happen, but like in general, it's not just one artifact coming down and you're losing the game. These two, oh, I play this. GG. Um,
Yeah.
but that happens sometimes. And I don't know if it's in this top, it's not. So I'll go ahead and talk about it here with these two. Dark Amber Vault is in here too. It is also one of these cards. If they have a 10 plus mutant deck, they land Dav, you can't answer. Winning that game becomes real, real hard for you because you like that is not embedded value that like SAS sees too well. It tries. It does actually okay with that, but it not even being up here is another reason why like things can just get really out of hand with that art.
Yeah, it's actually way down quite a ways, and autoencoder isn't anywhere. But um,
Yeah, I don't. That's one of her favorite cards, so that actually surprised
hmm. But kind of following up with some other new cards from Mass Mutations, we have Greed, Master of the Gray, Sloth, Cyberclone, and Ensign El Samra, and then Cronus. So definitely some good stuff there. Oh, Subject Kirby soon after that. Um, what's interesting about kind of all of these, maybe not Ensign El Samra or Master of the Gray, is they get value right when you play them as well.
me. Yeah, Ensign and even Chronos sometimes it's value when you play them.
Yeah,
Like their
sometimes.
value is embedded because they're enhanced.
Yep.
3 draws in your deck, 2 draws in your deck, like, that is an insane amount of value, so, like, Ensign could literally be a vanilla card with just the 3 enhanced draw, and it's still gonna be pretty high. But it actually has an ability that occasionally gets used.
Yep. Okay, on
Alright.
to the worst of Mass Mutations. Toad, Soul Fiddle, Wretched Doll, Amber Heart is a new one that's new in Mass Mutations.
Mm. Hey, it's a Sanctum. Shocking.
Doom Sigil and Niflhape.
I mean, just the fact that you have these other than the 3 that came from AOA initially, or the 2, I guess Sulfidal was Worlds Collide, like, let's see. What the first one that we see that is truly unique to MM, which would be the worst MM card, is Amberheart. And honestly, Amberheart is better than the artifacts that Sanctum initially had, like the Hollow Blaster version.
Yeah, that's true.
So, like, for this to be the worst card is already telling you something about MM actually being very, very good.
Yeah, and even Doom Sigil, it
It's
depends on
not
the deck.
horrible. Yeah.
Some decks
See,
is actually really
yeah.
good that needs a creature
Hmm.
control. The same with
Yeah.
opposition research. Like that can be killer in
Yeah.
some Logos decks that doesn't have creature control. You slap
I think
that
it
down,
just
they can't do anything.
comes down to it. Like, this is one of the things we're talking about. Like, MM in general has a very high floor. Like,
Yeah.
the cards are better. They were designing better cards, and well, then I don't know. They all quit or something. And got Dark Tidings. Which
And
we'll
that's
see
a
next.
good segue into Dark Tidings. And so we can take a look here at the highest and lowest AER arc decks, or cards, sorry. We also have some data to take a look at first. So let's take a look at the cards, and then we can take a look at the data. The data's got a bunch of caveats with it, but I think it's still actually quite interesting.
Our top card for Dark Tidings is Groundbreaking Discovery. That's a fun card. I don't know if it's the best.
Yeah, I don't know either. I mean, I would probably say like Deepwater Gruin, um, which comes in at 6 or
At least it
8.
made it. Yeah. Well, if we're talking unique to Dark Tidings, it goes Groundbreaking Discovery. Omnipus. I hate this card. Like, I
It
give
should
this
not be
card
that
crap
high.
all the time. Like, it's horrible.
And
All
spoiler
right.
alert, its win rate sucks too.
The evil twin for the sea urchin, which is most evil twins are real bad. The evil twin sea urchin does steal 2 on play without other than the tied like conditions like the other steal 2s that we've had before. So that one's really good.
Yep.
So that probably would be my highest unique Dark Tidings card as far as what I've seen so far. Um, because it
Yep,
is better than the Deepwater Gruin for that
that's
fact.
true.
Because
Yep.
it's net 4 that way. I do really like Abandoned Ship and Together. They do have those next, but
Yeah, those
again,
are
like this
solid.
is why Dark Tidings is what it is. Like these aren't like earth shattering, right? Like none of this is crazy. Sad, sad.
Yeah. And like, yeah, actually, most of the cards at the top here are repeats. The next
Mhm,
one is Harmonic Ritual, and then kind of it's just repeats until we get to Dark Discovery. And although Harmonic Ritual seems cool, like I think it's actually hard to pull off and get that value in a lot of decks.
for sure. Yeah, no, I don't ever get the fire.
Yeah. Going to the worst, we actually have a whole bunch of DT cards. Dive Pod, the Mysticetti, ISS Indominus, Amberfin Shark, SGS Illuminator. All DT
Yeah,
only cards.
all of these are real, real, real bad too. Like these first like 3 cards literally almost do nothing in any game. Like Dive Pod, Mysticetti, and the Indominus are trash cards. Like they
Yeah.
almost never they get played because they don't have like they're not one of these like they're not like Grommet level can't play this bad. But they get played and then they do nothing. Like that's just what they do. They do nothing.
Now my
Uh,
question though is why isn't Sauropod up here? I gotta
Sauropod
where the heck
should
is
be.
Sauropod? I'm looking, I haven't found it yet.
I mean, what? Just because it has a pip?
Okay, yeah. They gave it some for a pip. It's got an arc of 0.25 to 2. So on average just over 1. It's above Anomaly Exploiter. Come on.
Yeah, I don't agree with that. So I'm not sure how that happens. Sauropod is one of the worst cards in the game.
Yeah, that should definitely be up there. Okay.
Yeah.
Um so that was fun. I do have thank you to my friend Shugu who actually what he did was collect all the Master Vault data just recently from September 27th and took the OPD data and got win-loss rates for DT. Now there's a bunch of caveats. You know, there's not a ton of plays here. Probably a lot of it is sealed OP.
Yeah, like
Um,
that's the main caveat I think we need to emphasize is that while we can't guarantee, like we obviously don't know, I guess we kind of do. Like the only events that these would have been played at, the only OP data generated with DT was all store level. So
right,
the only data getting dumped in there is just whatever people were playing at the locals. And for the most part, like at my store, we still run. Actually, we just ran out of product last or 2 weekends ago. We were only running DT sealed, and we would play it, and then that would be the game. So I mean, I would bet money that like 90% of the data we're getting here is from sealed DT back when people were still running their locals. And very, very few of those are going to be from the chain bound to get dark tidings data. That said, I do know that there are some online weeklies that run that
right.
were using dark tidings in those, so it might not be quite like it could be like 80% sealed, but it is mostly dark tiding versus dark tiding data. And if you've played any Dark Tidings at all, you're gonna recognize that like playing Dark Tidings decks against each other is very different than playing offset because of the way their core mechanic works.
No, that's true. I still think it's somewhat interesting to look at. We do see here at the top of the kind of win percentage Together and Abandoned Ship, and
Hmm.
those also, and Deepwater Gruin, those also had kind of high arc ratings. Um, but it does get it interesting for some of the other ones with high arc ratings. Omnipus, it was rated high. It's only got a 47% win percentage,
This is
but
bad.
it only has very little plays, 461 plays. Um, and but there's also some interesting ones that look to be kind of underrated. Cement Shoes has a 52% win rating,
Mm.
um, but it's only 1.5 arc. Let's
Yeah,
see.
she did not rate raising the tide very high as far as a metric because it doesn't really fit anywhere, right? Like raising the tide is not one of the arc stats.
Right.
Like so it was initially pretty hard to evaluate how like what value that has. And again, we never went back and relooked at it. It's probably never going to go back and be relooked at.
CR Officer Hawkins has a 53% win rate. It's only got a average of 2.1
Hmm.
arc. And then the other one that I thought was interesting was All Tied Up has a 51.4% win rate, but only a 1.25 arc.
Yeah, I think all tied up it probably should be higher in my opinion. Hawkins I think is actually probably about right because most of the time it's not living your next turn. You're landing two. You only get more than that in most cases if you have Unity or Discord. Um,
Yeah, you're right. It's one of those cards, right? That it value also depends a lot on
mhm.
what it's with. You can get a lot more with Unity or Discord. Um, yeah. Okay.
Imperial Forge, 43%. Is that the lowest one here?
Yeah, so Imperial Forge was rated really high. It only has a 43% win rate. Now it only has 450 plays in Dark Tidings, but as we go to the bottom of the list, what's very interesting here is like all these cards are Saurian, and so
Yeah.
Imperial Forge also is going to struggle and just be really bad because all these Saurian cards just are bad.
And that's what I was about to say, like, I mean, Imperial Forge is bad in here because Saurians are bad in there. Like, it's again, it's not Broaden Our Worlds Collide, but like when you look at this set, like the dinos, I don't even know why they're so bad. It's just like a lot. They have a lot of creatures that, unlike the first, like the previous sets, just don't do anything. They don't actually affect anything. You have the one that exhausts himself when he takes damage for no freaking reason. He's a 7/2. We have other creatures that were like, come in to play ward someone at 5/1 taunt. Like what was the basis to get the NARP treatment? Like it was I don't know. They
Yeah.
just have a lot of cards that are like bad to negative, like as far as playing them.
Definitely. And
Uh,
so another interesting thing, and I think this actually is a little bit more relevant in sealed, is what it's called op. So op is average win percentage, and what op tries to tell you is how does this card perform relative to the rest of the house? And
mhm.
so this, if we while we look at these Saurian numbers, ostracize has a minus 5.4 op. That means it performs like minus 5% worse than all the other Saurian cards. Um, so I do think that's actually somewhat still relevant in sealed. So it's also kind of interesting to take a look at some of these numbers. Kind of ostracized Bumblebird, obviously really bad. Um, and then as we look at kind of some of the top op, way above everything, Deepwater Gruin, 7 higher. So its win percent, 54.5%. Win percent without it in the deck is only 47.4%.
Yeah, and that's what I was talking about. Like when you get to Dark Tidings, like the best house in Dark Tidings is like it's Unfathomable and Star Alliance, like together most of the time. But like
Untamed, right? Yep.
I mean, I'm sorry, Untamed,
Yep.
not Unfathomable. Like Untamed is just wildly, like, it just generates so much amber, and it keeps doing it. Like it doesn't stop because you just put a 5 power body on the board. You're expecting to get at least one reap value out of that at that level. People don't want to put the effort in to kill a 5 unless they're going to wipe your board anyway.
Yep. Okay. So I thought that was really interesting. Thanks for the data, Shugu. And let's move on to some questions that people had for you. We have a
Okay.
couple from Andrew, aka One Star Peeps, 5 Star Games. He said, "What architect is the most and least accurately captured by SAS?"
Interesting archetype. I would say the archetypes that are the most like accurately captured are the ones that lean into a very specific type. So like if you're looking for like a pure rush archetype and that's what you're looking for, SAS generally captures that pretty well for all sets because the entire system for SAS is based on Amber. It tries to break everything down into its Amber equivalencies. So if you're looking for that Amber Rush deck, SAS is probably the best to accurately say like, oh, this has a 30 expected Amber. Honestly, anything over 25, but the higher that number gets, you really are going to feel that when you play. And similarly to other decks, like if you're looking for like pure tempo, like speed, efficiency, if you're looking at those decks that have like start to get a 20 or higher efficiency, when you play those decks, you're going to feel that in a very tangible, significant way. So I think that's the like what it does the best at. It doesn't like if you're starting to mix archetypes or it's a very balanced deck, like it doesn't really encompass that as great. And we already talked about it on on the cast or the stream so far. As far as the least accurately one is obviously anything that is combo driven, that is trying to look at more than two cards at the same time to develop your win con. Um, so like decks like that, like if your deck
Yeah.
needs like a specifically like a Brachus plus Strix plus Tribute plus Ford or plus Six Semper, like all of these pieces in combination to hit something big, that's where it's really hard. Like it's not going to see a deck that can easily fire Dark Discovery or Ground Breaking Discovery versus decks that won't for Dark Tidings. Like that, it's really hard for it to see and capture accurately. Like the best AOA decks in the world, I don't think actually have like one of like Sasha's great. It is a
Right.
97 or whatever.
Yep.
But like there's also ones that are just as good, if not better than Sasha that are in that like 80 to 88 range. It's just never gonna see
Yeah.
that this is a better deck than Sasha or whatever.
Right. Okay, great. Good insight there. And then we also had a question from Real Player One. If they had to redesign SAS, what would they change?
Gosh, this is where I could like get in trouble or something. What would they change? I don't know what she would change. What I would change? I would probably like I know would end up being more numbers, but I would probably break out more stuff
Okay.
into different areas as far as like speed for one. I'll take that as an example. Like I think there are certain
Hmm.
types of efficiency that mean different things. Like
Yeah.
it means something to draw a card, right? Like we all know what that means. And it means something to play cards off house, which is functionally still just drawing a card. So I would keep those together. But like archiving a card by choice and archiving a card randomly are not the same thing as draw, and they all mean like significantly different things. So I don't know if it would end up being like two more buckets, like two buckets that is what efficiency is for me right now, or more, but it would at least be two. Like archive and draw for me are not the same thing. So that would look a little bit differently if I had to redesign it. Another thing that would look a little bit differently, I think, if we started over, I think she would agree with this too, is that creature control would probably look a lot different because like damage
Yep.
and other forms of removal are in no way equivalent. Especially now.
I,
It's
I was going to say the same thing because what you said about the efficiency, and I definitely agree. I look at that too. It's like the number doesn't tell everything. It's like being able to archive exactly what you want is so much different than archiving random
sure.
cards. And it's the same with the creature control for me. I always look like, okay, what cards do we really have here? Is this a conditional wipe or does it wipe everything? How much damage can I do? Ping damage, like all of that is important in different situations.
Yeah. Well, because I'm actually still on that DT Broadca deck. Like it says 17 creature code, which you would expect to be a lot and very effective. I'm looking through this. Like there is no board wipe in this deck. You would expect a 17 to have a board wipe.
Yeah.
Yes, it has mind over matter. Yes, it has in abandoned ship, and yes, there are two infightings. but that does not guarantee I'm going to kill my opponent's entire board ever. Like Mind Over Matter in mini games, especially if you've played much MM lately, can't be played. No, I'm not putting their 2 Kirby's and 1 Infernus back in their archive.
Exactly. Yep.
And the Bandit ship's the same story. No, I'm not sending them back to their hand. It's and especially going forward, we all know WoW is token based. You're going to see boards of 10, 12, 15, 20. It's gonna happen. And if you don't have like a gateway, even unlock gateway from back in the day, like a way to kill everything at some point in time, you're probably going to get wrecked at
Yeah.
least once in a top event, especially because of WoW coming out. MM's already does it to people. Um, heck, in MM, there's decks that can land a like 9 creature board every 3 turns. Like,
Yeah.
and that's gonna keep happening. So like that's another thing. Like if we had to I think she'd even agree with that. Nova, as far as the owner would probably look at how we did that from Go, as far as like this is removal that is unconditional. This is removal that affects everything, like that kind of thing. That way you just don't get this big clump of like, oh, there's a bunch of poison, positron bolts in here, and like that's
Right.
you have 5 of
Or
them. That is
or
not a lot to see.
definitely, or even bounce versus removal, like you're saying, because it's
Mhm.
totally different. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, it's going to be super interesting in DT. You bounce all their tokens. Now they have a whole bunch of more cards that they can do a whole bunch with,
Well,
potentially.
and that's another thing. Like as good as Nature's Call was against World Collide, it did take a hit against MM. It's fine against DT, but like it's gonna take a like that and Hysteria are gonna take a huge hit against Woe because you don't want to return tokens to their hand. You have no idea what those cards are. That's basically telling them to draw cards.
Yeah.
And then they get to choose the house. Like if you get unlucky enough, you could give them 3 of the same house back to their hand and then just get wrecked.
Yep.
Like yeah, that could be real bad. So, like, that is something that I would have redone. And I think the
That's
last oh, go ahead.
Well, that's what's so fun though. It's like the meta keeps changing. Like what all of these things do keeps changing and how valuable they are. So, and I think it even backs up your point of why maybe it needs to be broken out even more so
Mhm.
that you can tell
Yeah,
like, oh, I do want bounce versus Worlds Collide Saurian, but I don't want bounce versus DT or whatever it is.
yeah. I mean, the last adjustment that I know she doesn't entirely agree with is that for me, artifact control has always been huge. Like, always been that it should be higher. But from what MM did to a very small extent, DT, and then like all of this, the power artifacts that we had seen before and stuff we've already seen spoiled in the future, the actual value of artifact control should be a larger percentage of SAS in general. I think remove like reclaimed by nature's artifact control should like be a 3 at minimum. And like hard removal like poltergeist should start at 2, if not higher. Just to have a more tangible effect on your overall score. And yes, I know there's an argument out there that like it doesn't even exist for some decks. Like, okay, there's decks in Coda that don't win with creatures. That doesn't make your creature control as far as like the broad scale of your competition less valuable.
Yeah.
But at the highest level, like the decks you're seeing have these artifacts. They have auto encoder, they have amphora, they have dav, they have jar. They have these things. Transporter platform, like all of these will give them a decided advantage if they are unanswered.
Yeah, that's definitely an interesting point because I do look at the artifact control. But like, okay, say, I mean, let's go to an extreme. Say Reclaimed by Nature is a 1 versus a 10 in Arc. Like, obviously, if you're going up against those crazy Eton Jar Amphora Captura decks, you want it. But
Mhm.
to me, that's why it's important to look at every single kind of separate factor going into your deck to see how good it is. You really can't get a good feel of it by just looking at the overall number.
Sure. Um, yeah, I just think it needs to be a larger percentage. Like if we're
Yeah.
saying 90 is the threshold, I think that like 3 to 5 of that should be able to be represented from a deck that has solid, reliable answers. And right now it's just not that, not even close. Like, I think
Yeah, it makes
Reclaim by
sense.
Nature is just a 2. So 2 out of those 90 points is potentially one of the best cards in your deck.
Yeah.
I think it has to be more.
Yep. Great. Well, we've got through all our topics. We were almost 2 hours on the cast. Thank you so much, Big Z, for joining us on this. It's been a really fun discussion. Lots of good, interesting topics. Um,
Yeah, I had a blast. Always fun. Down to talk Keyforge. Um, yeah, if there's more stuff to talk about some other day, like we probably spend a whole cast just going through each of the actual arc numbers. I haven't done that in a long time, but I know that was something that I think Jupiter and I did a long time ago.
that would definitely be interesting, especially
And they're
yeah,
different now. Like the arc's literally different than it used to be.
yeah, and especially just thinking about DT or Winds of Exchange on the coming out soon
Hmm.
too.
For sure.
Putting out the link to the podcast for Archon's Corner there in the chat. Here's a Discord link for Archon's Corner. Please check that out. Also, tomorrow is the last day to sign up for the Ancient Bear Republic League. Big Z is also a captain for that.
I am a captain. I have my draft board ready. I have my own like players of Keyforge numbers next to every single draftable player.
Nice.
You will never get to know this number, but you have been judged and rated. You're on my board.
Now that would be interesting data that we'll never see. But there is a Discord to the ABR Discord where you can sign up for the league. It's lots of fun. Please join us. Already over 100 people signed up, and Ghost Galaxy has provided swag for prizes. So please join us.
Yep, it is the best league in Keyforge that I am aware of. It's been super fun. I've been a part of many of them. I think almost all of them. It's always a great blast. Fun people to play with all the time.
All right, and with that, I think we're done. Thank you so much again. Really appreciate all your time, and thanks for all you do for the community.
Keep forging. What we do.
That's what we do. All right. I'm going to close this out here, pull up some outro music. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for watching. Have a good rest of your day. And as Big C said, keep forging.